the United States, and in the measures he recommended to Congress. The people proved worthy of the trust. They promptly took every loan asked for the relief of the Treasury and sustained the national credit. They answered all his calls for men. They sprang into the ranks, shouting, "We are coming, Father Abraham." They cheerfully laid down life at his word. So far from this conflict proving a republic unfit to make war, or that for its prosecution there must be intensely centralized authority, it has demonstrated that a democracy trusted is mightier than a dictatorship. 3. His third towering landmark was the right of all men to freedom. And here, with his practical sense and acute vision, he rose to a higher, and I think a healthier, elevation than that of many heroic anti-slavery leaders. They were anti-slavery. Their lives were spent in attack. They sought to destroy a system. They told its wrongs and categoried its iniquities. He knew that light, let in, will cast out darkness, and that kindled warmth will drive out cold. He knew that freedom was better than slavery, and that when men see that it is so, they will decree freedom instead of slavery. He therefore entered the lists for freedom. He spoke of its inestimable blessings, and then, unrolling the immortal Declaration of Independence, claimed that, with all its dignity and all its endowments, liberty is the birthright of all men. He taught the American people that the inalienable right of all men to liberty was the first utterance of the young republic, and that her voice must be stifled so long as slavery lives. In his Ottawa speech he said, "Henry Clay, my beau ideal of a statesman, the man for whom I fought all my humble life, once said of a class of men who would repress all tendencies to liberty and ultimate emancipation, that they must, if they would do this, go back to the era of our independence and muzzle the cannon which thunders its annual joyous return. They must blow out the moral lights around us, they must penetrate the human soul and eradicate there the love of liberty, and then, and not till then, could they perpetuate slavery in this country." He laid his spear in rest and went forth with armor on, the champion of freedom. He claimed she should walk the world everywhere, untrammeled and free to bless the lowest as well as the highest. It was not right and never could be made right, to forbid working lawfully that all men might be free. Slavery debased, freedom lifted up. Slavery corrupted, freedom purified. Freedom might be abused, but slavery was itself a colossal abuse. He was no dreaming visionary, but stated with commanding clearness the doctrine of equality before the law, or political equality, distinguishing it from social equality. In Old Independence Hall, in 1861, he said of the colonies, "I have often inquired of myself what great principle or idea it was that kept this confederacy so long together. It was not the mere matter of the separation of the colonies from the motherland, but the sentiment in the Declaration of Independence which gave liberty, not alone to the people of this country, but I hope to the world for all future time. It was that which gave promise that in due time the weight should be lifted from the shoulders of all men." He held that instrument to teach that nothing stamped with the divine image and likeness was sent into the world to be trodden on, degraded and imbruted by its fellows. We search vainly for a clearer and terser statement of the true theory of equality than he gave last autumn in an address to a Western regiment. We have, as all will agree, a free government, where every man has a right to be equal with every other man. Has a right to be. Take the fetters from his limbs, take the load of disability from his shoulders, give him room in the arena, and then if he cannot succeed with others, the failure is his. But he has the right to try. You have no right to forbid the trial. If he will try for wealth, fame, political position, he has the right. Let him exercise it and enjoy what he lawfully wins. With such views he came to the presidency. Here he was an executive officer, bound by the Constitution, and charged with its maintenance and defense. He was to take the nation as the people placed it in his hands, rule it under the Constitution and surrender it unbroken to his successor. Accordingly he made to the Southern states all conceivable propositions for peace. Slavery should be left without federal interference. They madly rejected all. War came. He saw at the outset that slavery was our bane. It confronted each regiment, perplexed each commander. It was the Southern commissariat, dug Southern trenches and piled Southern breastworks. But certain border states maintained a quasi-loyalty and clung to slavery. They were in sympathy with rebellion, but wore the semblance of allegiance and with consequential airs assumed to dictate the policy of the president. He was greatly embarrassed. He made them every kind and conciliatory offer, but all was refused. Slavery on the Gulf and on the border, in Charleston and in Louisville, was the same intolerant, incurable enemy of the Union. He struck it at last. The Proclamation of Emancipation came, followed in due time by the recommendation that the Constitution be so amended as forever to render slavery impossible in state or territory. For these acts, he was arraigned before the American people on the 8th of last November and received their emphatic approval. In a letter written to a citizen of Kentucky, the President gave an exposition of his policy so transparent that I reproduce it in this place. It is a sufficient explanation and vindication. Executive Mansion, Washington, April 4, 1864. A. G. Hodges, Esquire, Frankfort, K.Y. My dear Sir, you ask me to put in writing the substance of what I verbally stated the other day, in your presence, to Governor Bramlett and Senator Dixon. It was about as follows. I am naturally anti-slavery. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember when I did not so think and feel, and yet I have never understood that the presidency conferred upon me an unrestricted right to act officially in this judgment and feeling. It was in the oath I took that I would to the best of my ability preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I could not take the office without taking the oath. Nor was it in my view that I might take the oath to get power, and break the oath in using the power. I understood, too, that in ordinary civil administration this oath even forbade me to practically indulge my primary abstract judgment on the moral question of slavery. I had publicly declared this many times and in many ways, and I aver that, to this day I have done no official act in mere deference to my abstract judgment and feeling on slavery. I did understand, however, that my oath to preserve the Constitution to the best of my ability imposed upon me the duty of preserving, by every indispensable means, that government, that nation, of which that Constitution was the organic law. Was it possible to lose the nation and yet preserve the Constitution? By general law, life and limb must be protected, yet often a limb must be amputated to save a life, but a life is never wisely given to save a limb. I felt that measures, otherwise unconstitutional, might become lawful by becoming indispensable to the preservation of the Constitution through the preservation of the nation. Right or wrong, I assumed this ground, and now avow it. I could not feel that to the best of my ability I had even tried to preserve the Constitution, if, to save slavery, or any minor matter, I should permit the wreck of government, country, and Constitution altogether. When, early in the war, General Fremont attempted military emancipation, I forbade it, because I did not then think it an indispensable necessity. When, a little later, General Cameron, then Secretary of War, suggested the arming of the blacks, I objected, because I did not yet think it an indispensable necessity. When, still later, General Hunter attempted military emancipation, I forbade it, because I did not yet think the indispensable necessity had come. When, in March and May and July, 1862, I made earnest and successive appeals to the border states to favor compensated emancipation, I believed the indispensable necessity for military emancipation and arming the blacks would come, unless averted by that measure. They declined the proposition, and I was, in my best judgment, driven to the alternative of either surrendering the Union, and with it the Constitution, or of laying strong hand upon the colored element. I chose the latter. In choosing it, I hoped for greater gain than loss, but of this I was not entirely confident. More than a year of trial now shows no loss by it in our foreign relations, none in our home popular sentiment, none in our white military force, no loss by it anyhow or anywhere. On the contrary, it shows a gain of quite 130,000 soldiers, seamen, and laborers. These are palpable facts, about which, as facts, there can be no cavilling. We have the men, and we could not have had them without the measure. And now let any Union man who complains of the measure test himself by writing down in one line that he is for subduing the rebellion by force of arms, and in the next, that he is for taking 130,000 men from the Union side, and placing them where they would be but for the measure he condemns. If he cannot face his case so stated, it is only because he cannot face the truth. I add a word which was not in the verbal conversation. In telling this tale, I attempt no compliment to my own sagacity. I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me. Now, at the end of 3 years' struggle, the nation's condition is not what either party or any man desired or expected. God alone can claim it. Whither it is tending seems plain. If God now wills the removal of a great wrong and wills also that we of the North, as well as you of the South, shall pay fairly for our complicity in that wrong, Impartial history will find therein new causes to attest and revere the justice and goodness of God. Yours truly, A. Lincoln. He struck slavery because slavery had clutched the throat of the Republic, and one of the twain must die. Mr. Lincoln said, "Let it be slavery." Christianity, declaring the brotherhood of race, redemption and retribution, answered, "So be it." The Bible, sealed by slave codes to 4 millions for whom its truths were designed, answered, "Amen." The gospel, long fettered by the slave master's will, and instead of an evangel of freedom made to proclaim a message of bondage, lifted up its voice in thanksgiving. Marriage, long dishonored, put on its robes of purity, and its ring of perpetual covenant, and answered, "Amen." And from above, God's strong angels and 6-winged cherubim, bending earthward, shouted their response to the edict of the great emancipator. 4. The next controlling idea was profound religious dependence. As a public man, he set God before his eyes, and did reverence to the Most High. It was deeply a touching scene as he stood upon the platform of the car which was to carry him from his Springfield home, and tearfully asked his neighbors and old friends that they should remember him in their prayers. Amid tears and sobs they answered, "We will pray for you." Again and again has he publicly invoked divine aid, and asked to be remembered in the prayers of the people. His second inaugural seems rather the tender pastoral of a white-haired bishop than a political manifesto. What were his personal relations to his God? I know not. We are not in all things able to judge him by our personal standard. How much etiquette may be demanded, how much may have been yielded to the tyranny of custom, we cannot tell.